Hi, and welcome back to part 2 of Adobe XD, your introduction. So we're going to pick up where we left off. So in this one, we're going to start working with the repeat grid tool. So because often when you're working with a website, you're going to have content that repeats or content elements that repeat. So that repeat grid tool allows you to speed up your prototyping. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this second page that I've made. And I'm going to delete some of these forms just because I no longer need these elements here. Go. And I'm going to go ahead and start using the repeat grid tool. So I'm going to use this photo, and I want to end up repeating it for all the different peaks that we have in this site. So I'm going to just set the height of this to being 200 pixels high. There we go. And then once I have that 200 pixels high, I'm going to click on the repeat grid tool. And then that gives me these little green handles that allows me to adjust and pull out. So you'll have one on the right and one on the bottom. So I'm going to grab the bottom handle and I'm going to start repeating that grid. I'm going to drag it down until I find a nice ending spot. Now I can also adjust this space in between. By default, it will give you some space. So if you want bigger space, you want a smaller space, you can just toggle in between and it will adjust equally all of those spaces. I'm going to adjust it down to 0, but you can see as I drag and move this, that little number all the way to the left tells me how many pixels of space I have in between. So I'm starting at 12 and I'm going to drop it down all the way to 0. So I want to have it at 0. I don't want it to go into the negatives. So to adjust my photos so that they're all different, because I don't want a repeating of the same photo, I'm going to use some of those photos that I have within my site folder. Located that assets folder, and I'm going to scroll down to find my peak photos names. So you can see here's a couple of those peak photos. And I'm going to select all of those, holding down Shift. And I'm just going to drag and drop them into that repeat grid. And you see how that swaps it with all of those images that we've got in here. Now I have too many photos to show up within this site, so I need to adjust that as well. It's just so I can see all of my photos. So in order to adjust that artboard, I'm going to click on the artboard itself. So in this case, the word about selects the entire artboard as opposed to the content within it. And then I can simply drag down and add a little bit more height to my artboard. So in addition to repeating those images, more images here, and once I get all my images visible, it will start repeating that image over and over again. So there, I've gone back to that first one. So there we go. There's all my images showing up. In addition to repeating images, it can also repeat text. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this text, this Welcome to Colorado, and I'm going to replace it with my mountain name. So I'm just going to put in some placeholder text here. So Mount Bierstadt, I think I've spelled that right. And I will adjust my character just to make it a little bit smaller. It's pretty big right now. Go. And once you've got your text just the way you want it in size, don't forget to add it to your character styles. So I may name that like mountain style or peak style. It's called peak style. So once I have my text ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and select that text box, and I'm also going to hit the repeat grid tool, and I'm going to grab that little green handle and drag it out to repeat that name. And then I'm going to adjust that spacing so that it lines up kind of in the center of the peaks. I have too many, way too many, so I'll drag that back down so that they fit. There we go. But obviously I don't want to have the same information repeating. So what I can do is that if you have a text file, which we do for this, that says peaknames.txt, so that's a text file, I can just grab that peak names text file and drop it right here, and you see that's going to replace that text with each of the listings in that text file. So then my last step is just that because some of these don't all fit, I may need to go back and readjust this. So once I have these in, I may need to adjust my text box to go a little bit wider, like on Quandary. So I can hit, go ahead and select that. Select these and adjust the width of that, which I'm starting to get some of that repeating, which I don't want. So I can hit ungroup grid, and then that gives me the individual text boxes that I want. So now that I've ungrouped that grid, I now have individual text boxes that are no longer adjusting and moving with the repeat grid. So that's a quick way to get prototyping with the repeat grid tool. All right, so now we're going to use that repeat grid tool to go horizontally and vertically instead of just vertically. So I'm going to create another page. So in order to do that again, I'm going to select the actual artboard for this page just by clicking on the name of the artboard and hitting Command plus D on a Mac or Control plus D on a PC, and that will duplicate that whole page for me. And I'm going to rename this page to be Hikers. So, and now I want to change up what I have on this. So I'm just going to select and delete all of this content. I don't need it. There we go. And I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and I'm going to click and drag out. I can hold down Shift to constrain proportions. I'm going to draw out a 450 by 450 pixel box here. And I can try and do it by kind of keeping an eye on my width and my height over here. I did okay, but obviously it's not perfect. You can also just type out your measurements. So there's 450 by 450. Then I'm going to draw out my text field underneath it. I'm going to type in first and last name, and then peak. So for the peaks that they've done, I'm going to go ahead and put those, if I need to, I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. And I'll put the peak underneath. So this will allow me to replace that again, how we did the content on the other page. I'm going to make that type a little bit smaller. That's pretty big. 21 pixels, that's pretty small actually. There we go. Get that all lined up. It dabbles in the details with using repeat grid. I'm going to also remove this logo just for right now. So I have a little bit more space on my artboard to work with. There we go. So now I have the box that will serve as my photo container, and then the text that will serve as my first name and last name of these different hikers. I'm going to select both of these things, and I'm going to use that repeat grid tool. I'm going to repeat the grid, going horizontally and then vertically. Great, so that's how you can use the horizontal and vertical. Now I just need to fill this in with some content. So I'm going to grab my assets. I'm going to find the profiles, which are just pictures of all these people. And that will fill in with pictures. Then I can grab that text box that I'm going to work with, and then I've got profile names.txt, so I'm just going to drag and drop that in. and that's going to show their first and last name and the number of peaks that they've done. And that fills that in very quickly for you. So since this content is a little larger than our page, let's see how we can make vertically scrolling pages. So if I click on my prototype tool right now and hit the play button, that will allow me to see my site from the beginning. For some reason, let me make sure I'm clicked on the correct artboard so that way it will play from that artboard. There we go. So it's going to scroll down to the height that my artboard is. So since we made these a little bit longer in the last movie, I can scroll down. Now, however, where that content stops and that artboard stops, this cuts off. So anything that is below that line gets cut off. So if I close this, you can see here's content below the end of that artboard. That doesn't look so good. So to extend that, I'm going to click on the artboard itself and drag. Oops, I must go back into design mode. Click back into design mode and then select the artboard. And then I can drag out the length of that artboard. That looks really nice. So you can see XD gives you this little dotted line in between here. This is what we call the first fold of a website. So the first fold is typically what will show up when the screen loads, but without having to scroll. Ideally, that all of your important content, not all of the important content, but the meat of your important content should go in the first fold of your website. People don't want to have to scroll to the bottom of your site in order to get to where they're trying to go. If they want to see some type of pertinent information, it should be within that first fold. So this gives you an idea of where the first fold of this site is. Every monitor is going to be a little bit different, but that kind of gives you an idea of where things should go. So now that I've extended that, I hit that play button. Again, I need to make sure I'm on the correct artboard selected here. There we go. And now I can scroll down and now I can see there is all the content for this page. So now that I've created this page here and I've tested everything out over the my scroll effect, I may think that, you know, when this page is previewed that these people just look really huge. This text looks really huge. So I can start making adjustments without having to redo this while the repeat grid is still an active element. I can simply double click to drill down on any of these elements within the repeat grid and I can start to make adjustments. So if I don't hold down shift, I can size, and you see how all these photos kind of size. I can make them ridiculously big or make them tiny, tiny. If I hold down shift, that is going to constrain the proportions. So since I started with a square, it will keep that square. So I can start to make these changes, and it's going to make that universal change on everything. And that looks a little bit better. Got kind of a huge gap here, so let's shorten up that gap. Shrink that down a little bit. So it does take a little bit of clicking around. So grab the gap in between again. Purple highlight is your gap in between, and you can see how I can adjust that grid that I've already made to make it a little bit smaller. I can grab the whole thing and move it around. So I feel like that's a little bit better than what I had before. That looks a little bit nicer, so if I want to preview this, I can hit play and I can preview that, and that's not quite as huge and horsey as it was. It's still pretty big, but not quite as big as it was. If I want to now get individual things again, I just hit that ungroup grid, and now you see that it's going to give me individual things. I'm going to create one more page for my site, and then I'm going to link it up to prototype it. So I'm going to go back to my About page, which I'm going to rename Peaks, so it's a little bit more, I guess, about what it is about. And I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that page because it was about the hiker, so I'm going to hit that Command D or Control D, and that's going to put that page over here. If I want to rearrange that workspace again, I can just simply click on a page itself and drag and move them around. Drag and move that one back. It's important to keep organized in your prototypes, so that way once you start getting a lot of pages, because you can see how we've barely done anything and we already have quite a few pages on here. And I'm going to rename this to being, I'm going to do a page for that first mountain. So I'm going to call it Bierstadt for that first peak. And I'm going to go ahead, I've already ungrouped this grid, so I can just clear off this stuff. I'm going to hit Ungroup Grid for my mountains. There we go. And now I can just select that picture that I've already got in place and drag it so it fits nicely on my page. I'm going to adjust my page size just to go back into that first fold range, and that looks a little bit nicer. I'm going to create some place for some content to go, so I'm going to make a text box, or not a text box, an actual box or a little rectangle. I'm going to place my content in here. I'm going to turn on the background blur. Ooh, nice. I might just pump up the brightness just a little bit so that my text reads pretty well. Uncheck the border. That looks good. Bring Mount Bierstadt over there. I'm going to hit Shift Command right bracket, which is Object Arrange Bring to Front, or Shift Control right bracket if you're on a PC. There we go, and that looks nice. For readability, I might make this text black instead of white. So I simply change the fill of that. I feel like that reads better. And now I can grab a text box, click and drag out some text for me to use, and then I can place in that text for that mountain. So if I locate my bierstadt.txt file, and simply drag and drop that into that text box. And then I can adjust this body copy here. And that looks pretty nice. The rest of the peaks are in your assets folder, so if you want to keep creating these files, you are more than welcome to. It's good for practice. All right, so now that we have a basic couple pages for our site, let's go ahead and think about prototyping. So I'm going to start thinking about how am I going to link these pages to each other, so that way when I get into my prototype, I can get from one page to another. So I need my basic hyperlinks, which I'm going to put along the top. So I'm going to start typing, and I'm going to have a home page. Go ahead and make that text white so that I can see it. And then I'm going to create my peaks page. And then I'm going to create my hikers page. So once I have all three of these, I'm going to select all three. I'm going to copy, Command C, I'm going to jump over to my next artboard and hit Command V. Jump over to my next artboard, hit Command V. Jump over to my next artboard, hit Command V. So that has pasted all of those in. And now I can start prototyping some of these sites and these interactions to work together. So to do that, I'm going to click on my prototype mode, and I'm going to link this home page to the peaks page. So when I click on the word peaks, it gives me this little blue arrow, and I can drag and draw that little arrow over to the peaks page. And it's going to give me this interaction menu on the right when you start doing this. So you've got a bunch of options in your interactions. The first thing is your trigger. What is the trigger doing? Your most commonly used one is going to be a tap. So when somebody taps, they click on this, it is going to trigger that interaction. You can also do drag, which would be a swipe. You can set up keys and gamepads, so if you want somebody to press a key in order to work it, they can do that as well. There's also voice interaction, which allows you to record and create a voice interaction where it'll be like, say something. So you can set that up too. We're just going to use tap, the most basic one, like you would a website. And then you have your transitions. So when I tap it, do I want an auto animate, overlay, speech playback, or previous artboard? So we want to transition because we want to transition into something, and the destination automatically, because we drug it over here, it's going to go to the peaks page. We can also set it to different ones if we would like to. And then our animation. And this is where things are pretty fun. I recommend just clicking your way through these and testing out the different animations that you have. You have slide left, slide right, slide upside down, push left, push right, push up, push down. If you want those screens to slide. So I'm going to set, in my little demo to you, I'm going to set something different for pretty much everyone. So I'm going to leave this at the default of dissolve. You have your options for ease out, ease in, snap, bounce, wind up, and those will have different, so if this is dissolving, how slow or how fast is this dissolving? Do you want it to have, the more seconds, the slower it's going to go. The shorter it is, I can leave nothing in between, so it just clicks and snaps. So we're just going to leave this one at default. Let's go ahead and that looks good. Let's go to hikers. So this one's pretty far away. If you're like, man, this is a long way to start dragging this arrow, I mean, I can do it, but it will get very annoying when you have a really large site. You can just simply click on that blue arrow, and it's going to give you this option. Where do you want it to go? I want it to go to hikers. So I'm just going to choose that interaction from the drop down rather than dragging and drawing the arrows. Comes down to personal preference, but sometimes it can get pretty tricky to do that. Animation, let's go ahead and do a slide left so you can see what that looks like. Easing, let's do a wind up and see how that looks. We'll do a slow wind up, 0.6 seconds. That looks good. So for my home button, unfortunately, since the home button is on the home screen, you cannot create that trigger to it. You can see from my destination, choose an artboard, home is not one of the options. I can't have it go back to itself, so it won't reload itself. However, I can do that from the peaks page. If I click on there, you'll see now that I'm on the peaks page. Oh yes, I can go home. So let's do a slide up. I'm just going to change all these up so you can see the different, make it a bounce, make that, just to see some of the different ones. These are fun to play with. So if you have one interaction done, like right now I have the peaks one, I can simply copy that interaction, copy, I click onto peaks here, I can just hit paste interaction, and that will save me some time. Oops, do it on this one, paste interaction, there we go, since I can't link peaks to peaks. Paste interaction, and that will remember, that'll save you some time. Once you do one of these once, you can do them on the other ones. So if I go to hikers, so I did hikers on this page, I can copy, paste interaction, paste interaction. And that will kind of speed up some of that prototyping that you're doing. So last couple things I want to do here. I'm going to set this, my logo, to go back to the home page. Click on my little blue arrow here. I'm going to say go home. I'm just going to have it dissolve. Ease in, ease out. Copy. Paste interaction. And then for my sub page, this Mount Bierstadt, I'm going to have this go to my Mount Bierstadt page. Just click and drag that. And again, I'll add some interaction to it. So those are all linking. You can see how once you start to prototype, you're going to get a lot of arrows going to a lot of places. But let's test that out. I got to get some of these going home. If you don't have a page linked to and back to another page, you'll get stuck once you actually hit that as your destination page. There we go. All right, so to test this all out, let me jump back to my home page, and I'm going to hit that play button to test my prototype. So when I hover over, I can see, yep, that'll go to peaks. This will go to hikers, and I can test out some of those transitions that I've done. Go back to the home. There you can see my bounce. So this is where you can have a lot of fun testing out your different parts of your site. Test your transitions, test what you think the effects that you like, and that's how you do some basic prototyping with XD. The last thing in our basic demonstration here is going to be how to record and share your site. So if you notice up in the top, when I'm in my prototype view, there's a little record button up here that I can start to record. And once I push it there, I've got my seconds going, and it's going to follow my mouse around. So if I hit peaks, there's my peaks. I hit hikers. That looks great. I go back to peaks. This looks awesome. Let's go home. And that gave me a 17, 18-second movie. If I hit stop, that's going to create a video for me. I'm just going to call this like mountain site. Go ahead and save that to my desktop here. I'm going to hit save. And that will give me on my desktop a nice MP4 video that I can open up and play. There's my interaction. You can see there's my video. So pretty cool. So that's a way that you can create a quick interaction of that video. You can have that movie that you could send to clients. You can also send a prototype for review by clicking back in here and going to share. So once I'm back in XD, I can go to share. And I can set what type of share link I get. Design review is going to get feedback of your design or prototype. So if you're wanting to send your site to a client, you can say, hey, I'm going to send this to design review. If you're going to go send it to development, you're sending it to your development team. So it's going to give them some of the HTML and CSS, not everything. User testing, if you want somebody to click through and test your prototype, that will give you that presentation. So I'm just going to send it to design review. I'm going to call my title mountain site. And I'm going to hit create link. That's going to create a link for me. It takes a hot second. Depending on what your share options are, the developer one can take pretty long because it's going to package stuff for you. And that's going to go ahead and give me that link. So now I can simply copy that link and I can share it with anybody on my design team that I'm working with, and they will get a version of this that they can click through and make comments on. So one last thing to note, in that if you sent somebody your share link and they're looking at your site, they may not be able to access all of the responsive features of your site. So if I go into prototype, this prototype isn't responsive. It's still just the desktop view. So you may want to build in your prototype a little button somewhere that people can get into your mobilely responsive site. So let me show you that real quick. So I'm just going to bring in let's go back to my design view here. I'm going to go to my desktop. And I'm going to make a little button here on the bottom. Let's just set a background blur because I like those. I think they're cool. I got my text box and I'm going to say tablet view. And this is pretty big. I'm going to make that a lot smaller. Let's make it like 12. So I'm going to make kind of a small touch point. I'm going to duplicate that, holding down the Alt Option key. And I'm going to make this mobile view. Let me zoom in just a little bit so I can actually see what I'm doing here. I'm going to set that to mobile view. Now I'm going to go into my prototype, and then I can set this whole trigger to that iPad home, and this trigger to the iPhone. So now if I preview this, I can understand there it's got me to that tablet. Ideally, I would have some type of back and forth, which I haven't done yet. If I come back here, then I can see that again, and that will get me to my mobile view. So you may want to bring that into your prototype. That way people can test all of the responsiveness that you've programmed into your prototype and see how everything is working and responding in your site. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.